Welcome to Sci-Fi Alien, where the boundaries of the universe are pushed, and the unimaginable comes to life. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if an entire civilization underestimated humanity, only to watch us rise and defy them? Imagine a species so certain of its superiority, yet so blind to the strength of human resilience. What happens when the galaxy's most powerful rulers are forced to acknowledge a species they thought was inferior? Stay tuned as we explore this thrilling tale of defiance, courage, and a shift in the cosmic order. Are you ready to find out how humanity changed the galaxy forever? The Galactic Council had ruled the galaxy for over 12 millennia, its influence stretching across countless star systems and civilizations. It was an institution built on the principles of order and progress, maintaining a delicate balance of power among the thousands of species that made up the Council. To the members of the Council, their decisions were final and unchallenged, a guiding force that shaped the fates of countless worlds. Humanity, on the other hand, had been a late addition to the fold, a species that had only recently reached the stars, still brimming with unrefined energy and emotion. From the moment the Council had first encountered humanity, they had been regarded with thinly veiled condescension. Humans were a level 3 species, a term that carried an air of superiority, implying that humanity was still in its infancy compared to the other advanced species of the galaxy. To the Council, humans were emotional, volatile, and unpredictable. Their technological achievements were impressive, but ultimately rudimentary when stacked against the capabilities of the Council's older civilizations. Humanity, with its passion and pride, seemed like little more than an oddity, a curiosity that would eventually fall into line like the others. And so, when the decision was made to relocate humanity off Earth, the reasoning was simple. Earth's solar system lay in the path of the Council's expanding wormhole network, a critical piece of infrastructure for galactic communication and trade. The location was perfect, the need urgent, and the solution, as always, was clear: humanity would move to a new home, chosen by the Council. The Council saw it as a generous act, a chance for humanity to evolve on a more suitable planet, far away from the perceived limitations of their solar system. But what the Council didn't foresee was the rage that would ignite when the order was given. Humans, who had always held a deep connection to their world, a connection that ran far deeper than mere geography, had been told to abandon it. Earth was their birthplace, their identity, and the very foundation of their history. The simple suggestion that they should leave it behind, that they should surrender their home to an unseen, uncaring bureaucracy, was too much for them to bear. Officer Newm, a seasoned diplomat and loyal servant to the Council, was tasked with delivering the order. As he stood before the human delegation in the capital of the Galactic Council, he felt a familiar tension in the air. He had seen this before: species that feared the unknown, species that resisted change. But nothing could have prepared him for the response he received. "This is our home," the human ambassador, Admiral Javier Reyes, said with quiet resolve, his voice steady yet full of an underlying fire. "Earth is not just a planet to us. It is the very essence of who we are. We will not abandon it, not for the promises of a more comfortable world, not for your progress." Newm had felt the weight of those words pressing down on him, but he was only the messenger. His role was to deliver the message, not to question it. The Council's decision was final. But as he stood there, watching the human faces, so filled with emotion, so unyielding in their defiance, he felt an unease stirring within him. These humans, so often dismissed as simple and illogical, were showing something that even the most advanced species in the galaxy could barely comprehend: determination. "It's not just about progress," Reyes continued, his gaze unwavering. "You cannot come to our planet, tell us to leave, and expect us to go quietly. Earth is ours, and we'll fight to protect it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Newm had delivered countless orders in his career, some of them harsh, some of them difficult, but never had he felt such a palpable defiance. He had never considered that one day, he might find himself facing a species willing to stand against the might of the Galactic Council. It was supposed to be a simple relocation, a bureaucratic decision. Yet, here he was, at the center of something far more profound. Back in the council chambers, first speaker Zorban's 4 eyes gleamed with barely contained fury. "A level 3 species defies our authority," he hissed, his voice like a low growl. "This is unprecedented. No one has ever resisted the council's decisions like this. We must remind them of their place." Zorban's rage was palpable, but as Newm watched the fury unfold, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of doubt creeping into his thoughts. Was this truly the right course of action? Was the council in the right to strip away the human connection to their world so callously? Or had they misjudged the very nature of humanity itself? "It's not just a matter of relocation," Newm interjected, his voice soft but resolute. "It's about survival. Earth's location in the galaxy makes it a strategic point, a junction for the wormhole network. The Council's infrastructure requires this." "But these humans," Zorban retorted, his voice filled with disdain, "have no concept of the greater good. They have no idea what's at stake." Newm hesitated. He had always been the loyal servant, the one who believed in the Council's vision of progress. But as he looked at the faces of the humans, defiant and proud, he began to feel something shift inside him. Could it be that the greater good wasn't just about galactic politics and expansion? Could it be about something far deeper, something that transcended even the reach of the Council itself? He thought back to Admiral Rey's words. "Earth is ours," he had said. And in that moment, Newm began to understand the gravity of what the humans were fighting for. Back on Earth, as humanity braced for the Council's retaliation, they weren't just preparing for battle, they were preparing to fight for their very existence. They would not be cowed, not by superior technology, not by bureaucrats hidden light years away in council chambers. They would fight for freedom, for the right to defend their home, to protect their history, their future, their souls. The council had crossed a line, but in doing so, they had awakened something in humanity that even they had not anticipated. The humans might have been dismissed as inferior, as naive, and emotional, but now, they were showing the galaxy what true strength looked like. The council had made a grave mistake, and it would cost them more than they could ever imagine. For the first time, Officer Newm knew that his mission had changed. It was no longer about delivering orders. It was about understanding what right truly was. And now, standing at the precipice of interstellar conflict, he could only wonder, had the Council truly misjudged humanity, or had they simply underestimated their own arrogance? The Galactic Council had made its decision, and to many, it seemed as though it was a foregone conclusion. Earth, a planet brimming with life and untapped potential, was to be relocated, displaced for the sake of the greater galactic order. The wormhole network expansion required it. For the Council, the logistics were simple: humanity would move. No debate, no discussion. The Council had spoken, and that should have been the end of it. But there was something the Council had failed to account for, something that the humans, despite being a level 3 species, had in abundance. They had spirit, a deep, untamed determination to protect what was theirs. As Officer Newm stood in the Great Chamber, surrounded by representatives from 1,000 other worlds, the words of Admiral Javier Reyes rang in his ears, echoing with an intensity he had never anticipated. This is our home. Earth is not just a planet to us. It is who we are. We will fight for it, not for the promises of a new world, not for your progress. For us, Earth is everything. It is our history, our identity, our soul. We will not abandon it. Newm had listened in stunned silence, knowing what he had been sent to do. He had come to deliver the order, to follow the will of the council. But as Reyes spoke, Newm felt the sharp sting of doubt piercing through his thoughts. These weren't the words of an ignorant species. They were the words of a people who had something deeper than just technology or resources, a bond to their home. It was not something the council could understand, not something they could quantify in terms of galactic logistics or power dynamics. Earth wasn't just land and water. It was their everything. The room had fallen silent. Around him, representatives from the council were stunned by humanity's defiance. To them, it was absurd. No species had ever rejected relocation before. The thought that a primitive race would stand against the might of the galaxy's governing body was, in their minds, incomprehensible. But as Newm stood there, feeling the weight of humanity's words pressing on him, something inside him shifted. They can't be serious, can they? First speaker Zorban's voice cut through the silence, dripping with disdain. This species, this humanity, they have no concept of the greater good. They have no understanding of what's at stake, said third speaker Vexpar, his voice thick with impatience. The wormhole network must expand. We cannot halt progress for the sake of a single planet. A planet that, frankly, is not even worthy of our attention. Newm, feeling the eyes of the council on him, spoke up hesitantly. It's not just about progress, Zorban. Earth's location, its role in the wormhole expansion, makes it a strategic point. But this is about more than just location or resources. Humanity isn't asking for permission. They're telling us no. The words hung heavy in the air. The council's shock was palpable. It had never been questioned before, not in the way humanity was questioning them. They had always viewed species like humans as mere subjects to be managed, moved, and shaped according to the council's designs. But this time, they weren't dealing with an obedient species. They were dealing with a people who had something that the council couldn't see, an undeniable will to protect what was theirs. As the council discussed their next steps, Officer Newm felt the growing tension in his chest. His role was clear. He had been sent to make sure the relocation happened. But as he looked around the room, at the faces of his colleagues, and then back at the human delegation, he felt something within him stir. These humans weren't afraid. They weren't intimidated by the weight of the council's authority. They were defiant. Later, back aboard his diplomatic cruiser, Newm's thoughts swirled. He had delivered the message, but humanity's words had left a lasting mark on him. Their response was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't just resistance, it was a full-throated rejection of everything the council stood for. And that refusal to submit, was a seed that would soon grow into a full-scale rebellion. As the days passed, Newm received word of the human military's movements. They weren't preparing to negotiate. They weren't waiting for the council's decision. They were preparing for war. Humanity had not only rejected the relocation, they had begun fortifying their defenses. They had deployed their home fleet, and more shockingly, they had activated something called Project Thunderbolt, a secret military project that had been kept under wraps for years. Newm had no idea what Thunderbolt was, but the Council's intelligence was already buzzing with concern. The humans were serious. He couldn't help but wonder, had they known all along? Had humanity been preparing for this day, the day the Council would overstep its bounds and demand Earth's surrender? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had been preparing, not just for a diplomatic confrontation, but for a fight. And they were willing to do whatever it took to protect their planet. No negotiations, no compromises. Earth was their home, and they would defend it at any cost. It was then that the magnitude of the situation truly hit Newm. The humans weren't just defending their home, they were declaring something. They were showing the Council that they would no longer be passive players in the galactic game. They weren't going to be moved or dictated to anymore. They would take their place on the galactic stage, and they would fight for it. When the enforcement fleet was finally dispatched, the Council expected a swift, overwhelming victory. They expected the humans to surrender, as every species before them had done. But instead, they found themselves facing a force unlike any other. The humans weren't running, they were pushing back with everything they had. The battle that followed wasn't just a clash of fleets. It was a clash of wills, a test of strength, of determination, of everything that made humanity who they were. The humans fought with unprecedented courage, pushing the Council's forces back with advanced technologies, strategies, and a fierce will to survive. They weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to remain who they were, for the right to keep their home. Newm watched from the sidelines, torn between his duty to the Council and the undeniable truth of what was happening. The humans had fought back, not because they had to, but because they were unwilling to be silenced. And in that moment, as the battle raged and the tide began to turn, Newm realized that humanity had given the galaxy something it had never seen before: true strength. Not in the form of weapons or technology, but in their resolve. Humanity's defiance had sparked something far more powerful than a mere rebellion. It had sparked a revolution, one that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Council and change the course of history forever. The rebellion had begun. Humanity's defiance against the Galactic Council was no longer just a political statement. It was a full-fledged battle, one that would challenge everything Newm had ever known. Officer Newm, who had once walked the fine line of diplomacy with unwavering loyalty to the Council, found himself facing an internal conflict that threatened to unravel his very identity. The message was clear: humanity would not bow to the Council's will. The question now was, could he continue to serve a council that had crossed so many lines, or had his role in this cosmic drama already been decided? The weight of it all sat heavily on Newm's shoulders as he sat alone in his quarters aboard the diplomatic cruiser. Outside the viewports, the stars passed by in a cold, calculated blur, just another reminder of the vastness of the universe, a universe that now seemed so far removed from the world he had once believed in. He thought about the humans, their eyes full of determination, their voices unyielding. They weren't pleading for mercy. They were demanding respect. Earth wasn't just a planet to them. It was their soul, their history, their entire existence. And they were willing to fight for it? "I never thought it would come to this," Newm muttered to himself, the words barely a whisper. He ran a hand through his short, dark hair, feeling the weight of his position, the weight of his role in the Council's plans. He had spent his entire career building a reputation that was now hanging by a thread. The message from Admiral Reyes echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. "We will not abandon Earth. Not for your promises of a better world. You do not get to decide our fate." Newm closed his eyes, recalling the moment when Reyes had spoken those words. The anger, the raw emotion, the conviction. He had never seen a human so resolute. And yet, despite the odds, despite the overwhelming power of the council, the humans had found their voice and were ready to fight. It made Newm uneasy. In all his years of serving the council, he had never witnessed such defiance, such a willingness to die for something so intangible. The humans weren't fighting for resources. They were fighting for something much more powerful, their freedom. And that's what plagued him. What had once seemed like a simple mission, delivering an order, had now become a crisis of loyalty. Newm had followed the council's directives without question, trusting in their wisdom, their sense of justice, their purpose. But the more he thought about it, the more he saw the cracks in the foundation. The council's decision to relocate humanity wasn't about the greater good. It wasn't about progress. It was about control. The realization hit him like a shockwave. "I can't do this," he said to himself, his voice thick with emotion. He stood up and paced the small confines of his quarters. He had been a loyal servant of the council for years, but now, the very foundation of his loyalty had been shattered. But Newm wasn't the only one struggling with this revelation. Back in the council chambers, Zorban, the first speaker, had been pushing for a swift resolution to the rebellion. The enforcement fleet was already mobilizing, and the council's top officials were preparing for what seemed like an inevitable victory. But Newm's message to the council was filled with a sense of urgency he had never felt before. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. The humans had given him something he could not ignore, a reason to question everything he had been taught to believe. "I trust you have the situation under control, Officer Newm," Zorban had said during their last transmission, his voice clipped and formal. "We need you to ensure that the operation proceeds as planned. Earth's resistance is insignificant." Newm swallowed hard. He had heard those words so many times before, calm, authoritative, dismissive. But now, they no longer carried the weight they once had. Insignificant. That was how the council saw humanity, but the humans had proven them wrong. It wasn't just their technology that was lacking, it was the council's inability to understand humanity's will. They had underestimated them. "I will do my duty, first speaker," Newm had responded, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. He had always believed that the duty he served was one of noble intent, but now, he was beginning to question the very nature of that duty. Could he still follow orders that would lead to the destruction of the humans' home? The moment the transmission had ended, Newm found himself staring at the stars through the viewport again. He had always trusted the council's judgment. He had always believed that their decisions, though harsh at times, were for the greater good of the galaxy. But this was different. The council had crossed a line. And the more he thought about it, the clearer it became, he couldn't be a part of it anymore. The rebellion was no longer just a political event, it was a personal one. The humans had stood up for something. And in doing so, they had forced him to confront the darkness in the council's intentions. As he sat there, caught between his duty and his conscience, the decision became clear. He had to act. He turned toward the communications console, his hands shaking slightly as he typed in the secure codes. This was a message he had been dreading to send, but he knew it was the only option left. The fate of humanity, and perhaps his own future, depended on it. "Admiral Reyes, this is Officer Newm. The Council is preparing to escalate the conflict. They believe humanity is no match for their fleet. But they do not understand your resolve, your strength. You have a chance to win this. The Council's plans to relocate Earth are part of a larger agenda to consolidate power across the galaxy. But you must be prepared for their full assault. The enforcement fleet is mobilizing, but they have underestimated you. He paused before sending the message, his heart pounding. It was a risk. He could be branded a traitor. But the humans had shown him the truth, and he could not deny it anymore. With one final breath, he pressed send. The message was sent. Newm leaned back in his chair, his chest tightening as he waited for a response. His actions had set in motion a chain of events he could no longer control. He had betrayed the Council, and there was no turning back. But as he waited, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for the Council's vision of order. He was fighting for something much bigger, a galaxy where freedom, not control, would reign. The battle for Earth had just begun, and Newm's role in it had shifted forever. The decision had been made. Officer Newm could feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The message to Admiral Reyes had been sent, and with it, the final strands of his loyalty to the Galactic Council were severed. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. He wasn't just a messenger anymore, he had become a part of something far greater than himself, a rebellion, a fight for humanity's survival. It was in the quiet moments after sending that message that Newm truly realized the magnitude of what he had done. He had betrayed the Council, his comrades, his entire career, his identity. There would be no going back to the comfortable life of a diplomat, no more carefully crafted speeches in the Council chambers, no more assuming that everything he had been taught was absolute truth. The simple act of warning Reyes had set in motion something he could no longer control. He had sided with humanity, and in doing so, he had become part of their cause. Sitting alone in his quarters aboard the diplomatic cruiser, Newm stared at the blank screen in front of him, his hands trembling. A storm raged inside him, guilt, fear, and an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing the right thing. But the thought of the consequences, the punishment that would surely come, hung over him like a dark cloud. He could already hear the Council's scorn, the accusations of treason. Would they exile him? Or worse, would they see him as a liability to be eliminated? The chime of his comm panel broke his thoughts, and he stood, his heart racing. He knew who it was before the screen lit up, first speaker Zorbin. The Council had no doubt already discovered the breach in their systems. He would be summoned to answer for his actions, and Newm knew there was no way to explain his decision. Officer Newm, Zorbin's voice came through the comm with an icy itch. You have disobeyed the most fundamental order from the Council. You have jeopardized the entire operation. You will explain yourself immediately. Newm swallowed, feeling the lump in his throat. He had prepared for this moment, yet the reality of it still hit like a shockwave. This was it, the moment where his life would change forever. No more serving the Council's whims. No more pretending that their decisions were just. The fight for Earth had brought him to this point, and now, he had to stand by his decision. I understand the gravity of what I've done, Newm began, his voice steady, though his pulse was hammering in his chest. But I cannot continue to serve an institution that is willing to destroy innocent lives for the sake of control. Humanity has shown me that they are more than what the Council believes them to be. They are not just a primitive species to be relocated. They are fighting for their survival, their identity, and their right to exist. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Zorbin's response came, cold and filled with venom. You are a traitor, Newm. You have betrayed us, betrayed everything we stand for. Your actions have consequences. The Council does not tolerate insubordination. Newm took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what Zorban was implying. He had always been loyal, always been the one to carry out orders without hesitation. But now, for the first time in his life, he had to face the truth. The Council wasn't the moral beacon it claimed to be. They weren't acting in the best interests of the galaxy. They were using their power to manipulate and control, and humanity had just become the scapegoat for their unchecked ambition. "I'm sorry," Newm replied quietly. "But I cannot be a part of this any longer. I've seen the truth, Zorban. And I will not be complicit in the destruction of a species simply because they are different. Humanity is not the enemy. The real enemy is the system you've built, the system that sees entire civilizations as expendable." Zorban's fury was palpable. "Even through the COMM you will regret this, Newm. I guarantee it. You will be hunted, branded a traitor, and your actions will lead to nothing but your downfall. You've made your choice." The screen went dark, and Newm sat there for a moment, the words echoing in his ears. He had chosen to defy the Council, and with that defiance came the certainty of exile, or worse. But even as the fear crept in, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in his life, he wasn't following someone else's orders. He was acting on his own conscience, guided by a newfound purpose. The weight of his decision was heavy, but it felt like the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. It was then that the second message came through, this one from Admiral Reyes. Newm's hands trembled as he read the words on the screen. The Admiral was ready. The humans were moving forward with their plan, and they would not stop until Earth was protected. Newm's heart swelled with a sense of pride he had never felt before. He had made the right choice. He wasn't alone in this fight. Humanity had accepted him as an ally, even though he had once been their adversary. "Officer Newm," the message read, "I've received your warning, and we're prepared to take the fight to them. We stand united, and together, we'll show the Council that we will not be silenced. Earth is our home, and we will defend it, no matter the cost." A sense of resolve washed over Newm. He had chosen to be a part of something much bigger than himself. The betrayal had not just been against the Council, it had been against the very system of oppression they represented. And now, he was ready to stand with humanity, side by side, as they fought to protect the one thing that mattered most, their freedom. He stood up from his desk and turned toward the window, looking out at the stars once more. The galaxy, vast and cold, had always felt distant to him. But now, it felt different. The stars seemed within reach, and for the first time, Newm could see a future beyond the Council's reach, a future where freedom wasn't a luxury, but a birthright. The time had come. The Council's reign would come to an end, and humanity's fight for their future would not be in vain. Newm had chosen to be a part of that fight, and he would stand by them, no matter the consequences. His journey had only just begun. Newm's decision to betray the Council had set off a chain of events he couldn't have anticipated. As the reality of his defection began to sink in, he still couldn't escape the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something far larger than he had ever imagined. Humanity, once regarded as a mere level 3 species by the Galactic Council, had stood up, not just to defend their planet, but to prove something much more profound, that they would not be pawns in someone else's game. And now, as the battle escalated, Newm watched in awe as the humans began to defy every expectation. The Council's enforcement fleet had arrived in Earth's orbit, prepared for what they assumed would be a quick and decisive operation. Their ships, sleek and advanced, were designed to overwhelm, to impose the Council's will. They had never lost a battle of this scale, and they fully expected humanity to bend under the weight of their superior power. But what they didn't understand was that humans didn't break easily. They didn't bend. They fought with everything they had, driven by something far stronger than fear, the will to survive. As the first volley of attacks rained down from the enforcement fleet, Newm found himself monitoring the battle from the orbital station. His stomach churned as he watched the human fleet, smaller but far more agile, move in a way that seemed almost chaotic, yet incredibly effective. The humans had adapted, using every available resource to their advantage, their tactics unpredictable and relentless. Their ships, though technologically inferior to the Council's, fought with a ferocity that was impossible to ignore. "Impossible," muttered a voice behind him. It was Zorban, the first speaker, his tone filled with disbelief. "How are they doing this? We've crippled their communication systems. How are they still coordinating this defense?" Newm didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, he didn't fully understand how the humans had pulled this off, but he knew one thing for certain: they were winning. Their smaller ships moved through the battle with precision, striking at key points in the Council's fleet with a brutality that defied the conventional rules of engagement. They didn't follow orders in the way the Council expected. They weren't bound by the same constraints that governed every other species the Council had ever dealt with. "They've adapted," Newm said quietly, almost to himself, though he knew Zorban had heard. "They're not just fighting. They're learning as they go." Zorban shot him a cold, withering glance, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes: uncertainty. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. The Project Thunderbolt, humanity's secret weapon, had been unleashed. Newm had known the details only in passing, but now, as the weapon activated, he understood the full extent of its power. Thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a game changer. Energy beams, focused with unimaginable precision, tore through the Council's ships, disabling their defenses and crippling their communication networks. The once imposing fleet now found itself at the mercy of a people it had underestimated for too long. On the ground, the human forces were rallying. Newm's eyes moved to the communications panel in front of him, watching as the human resistance units sent messages to the front lines, coordinating their movements with eerie effectiveness. Despite the technological disparity, despite everything the Council had thrown at them, the humans were winning. "They've been preparing for this," Newm whispered, almost in awe. "They knew. They knew we would try to take them down, and they didn't just defend, they fought back with everything they had." Zorban, unable to hide his fury any longer, slammed his fist on the table in front of him. "This can't be happening. We are the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. How are they doing this? How are we being beaten by a species like this?" Newm's mind raced. He had seen humanity's resilience firsthand. It was something the Council had failed to understand. In every report, in every meeting, humanity had been reduced to a simple equation: technologically inferior, emotionally driven, bound by their own limitations. But in that moment, he saw the truth: humans didn't just survive, they fought for what mattered most. They fought for their home, their history, their future. They fought for each other. The battle continued to escalate. The enforcement fleet had been thrown into disarray. The humans had found a way to turn the tide, not by matching the Council's firepower, but by exploiting their weaknesses, by refusing to give up when every other species would have. They understood something the Council didn't: victory wasn't always about strength. Sometimes, it was about staying power, about fighting for something larger than yourself. Back on the ground, humanity's forces were not retreating. Instead, they were pushing forward, relentless in their determination to protect their planet. The human leadership, led by Admiral Reyes, had shown an unwavering resolve throughout the conflict. As the situation grew more dire, Reyes sent a message to the human fleets, one that was broadcast across the galaxy. To the Galactic Council, the message began, calm yet filled with authority. We did not ask for war. We did not seek this fight. But make no mistake, we will fight to the last breath to protect our home. Earth will not fall. We will rise, and we will defend what is ours. This is not your victory to claim. The transmission hit the council like a blow to the chest. It was a direct challenge, a declaration that humanity would not bend, would not fall into submission. It wasn't just words, it was a promise. And as the council's representatives watched the unfolding events, they realized something crucial: humanity wasn't just resisting, they were leading a movement that would echo throughout the galaxy. Back on Newm's cruiser, he sat in silence, watching the human forces push forward with a force he couldn't deny. For the first time in his life, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The humans had triumphed, not because they had the best technology, but because they had something far stronger, their unbreakable spirit. And now, as the Council's fleet faltered, as humanity's victory became inevitable, Newm couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what had transpired. He had feared that he would be forever marked as a traitor. But now, as he saw the humans' victory unfold, he knew that he had made the right choice. Humanity had won, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. Their fight had not only secured their survival, it had redefined what it meant to be a part of the galaxy. The Council had underestimated them, and humanity had proven, once and for all, that no one could take their home from them. The battle for Earth was far from over, but in that moment, humanity had triumphed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The tide had turned. After days of intense battle, with humanity's forces relentlessly pressing forward, the Galactic Council's fleet lay in tatters. The humans, once dismissed as inferior and incapable of standing up to the might of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, had proven their strength, not in firepower, but in sheer will. The defiant spirit they had displayed in the face of annihilation had pushed the Council to the brink. But now, as the remnants of the enforcement fleet retreated, the Council had no choice but to face the undeniable truth: the very foundation of their control over the galaxy was crumbling, and the humans had shaken it to its core. This was no longer just a battle for Earth, it was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. And as the Council's leaders convened to address the unprecedented turn of events, it became clear that humanity's challenge had forced a reckoning. First speaker Zorban stood before the Council's holographic projection, his four eyes flickering with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The once impregnable might of the Council's fleet had been shattered by humanity's unexpected strategy. The humans had done what no one thought possible: they had fought back, and in doing so, they had exposed the Council's vulnerabilities. Zorban clenched his fists, his voice filled with venom. This is unacceptable," he growled, his tone sharp. "We were supposed to guide them, teach them, elevate them. Instead, they've turned on us, defying our authority at every turn. They are a level 3 species. They should have cowered before our might, but instead, they brought us to the brink of destruction." One of the other council members, Vexpar, spoke up, his tentacles quivering with agitation. "They've turned our own technology against us, first speaker. We underestimated them. We believed their resistance would be short-lived, but they've not only survived, they've adapted. Their Project Thunderbolt, it's unlike anything we've seen. We are no longer fighting a primitive species. We are fighting an evolving enemy, one that refuses to surrender. The weight of Vexpar's words hung heavy in the room. The Council had always prided itself on its ability to crush rebellion, to maintain order across the galaxy. But this was different. The humans were not like the species they had subdued before. They weren't driven by a hunger for power or conquest. They were driven by a deep-rooted need to protect what they loved, to defend their home. And in that, they had become a force the Council could no longer ignore. As Zorbin absorbed Vexpar's assessment, his expression darkened. "So what now?" he demanded. "Do we continue this pointless conflict? Do we send another fleet to crush them? Or do we acknowledge the inevitable?" His voice wavered with frustration, something that had never happened before. The Council's control over the galaxy had always been absolute. Yet here they were, on the verge of a humbling defeat. Newm, still in his position as a consultant for the Council, stood at the back of the room, silent and observing. His role had shifted long ago, from a loyal servant to a reluctant traitor, but now, he was watching history unfold. The very institutions he had once served, the very values he had upheld, were breaking down in front of his eyes. He had warned the Council, had begged them to consider a peaceful resolution. But now, as he looked at Zorbin, he knew it was too late for diplomacy. "This is no longer about Earth, Zorbin," Newm said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. The Council turned to him, their eyes narrowing. "It's about something more profound. Humanity has shown us that they will fight for what they believe in, even if it costs them everything. And that is something the Council cannot control." Zorbin's gaze hardened, but Newm could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The first speaker was a seasoned diplomat, a leader who had ruled with an iron fist for centuries. But now, in the face of humanity's unyielding resolve, Zorbin was being forced to confront a new reality, one where the Council was no longer the unquestioned authority. Newm's words were not just a challenge, they were a reality check. "The humans didn't just resist us," Newm continued. "They forced us to see our own flaws. The Council isn't invincible, and the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can find a way forward. We've had control for millennia, but that control is slipping away. If we don't change our approach, if we don't evolve with the times, we'll be left behind." Zorbin's fists clenched tighter. His pride, his power, everything he had built over the years, was unraveling. The Council was no longer united, and humanity's rebellion had sparked an existential crisis. "You speak of change, Newm," Zorbin sneered. "But what change are you suggesting? That we allow these primitive creatures to dictate our future? That we give them the freedom they've stolen from us?" "I'm not suggesting that at all," Newm replied. "I'm saying that we can't keep treating species like tools. We can't just use them and discard them when they're no longer useful. Humanity has earned the right to be part of this galaxy, not as a subject species, but as an equal." A tense silence filled the room. Zorbin, his face a mask of anger, could barely contain his rage. He had always viewed the galaxy as his to command, a vast empire built on the submission of lesser species. Now, in the face of humanity's rising power, he was being forced to reckon with the limits of his control. Finally, Admiral Reyes's voice came through the Council's communication channel, cutting through the tension like a knife. "First speaker Zorbin," Reyes's voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge of authority in his tone. We have come to the conclusion that this conflict is not only senseless, but it is also costly. You have underestimated humanity, and now you must deal with the consequences. Earth will no longer be your pawn. We will not submit, and we will not bow to your demands. We are ready to negotiate, but only on equal terms. Zorban's face twisted in fury. Negotiations. You think we will simply accept your terms? He spat, his voice a mix of disbelief and resentment. You, a level 3 species, think you can dictate terms to us? Yes, Reyes replied, the weight of his conviction clear in every word. Because you've shown us that you don't understand what strength truly is. It's not about power. It's about the will to protect those we love, to fight for what we believe is right, even when it seems impossible. The message from Admiral Reyes was not just a declaration of victory, it was a declaration of change. The Galactic Council had been shaken to its core, and they knew that their old ways were no longer viable. Humanity had proven that they would not be manipulated, that they would not be controlled. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and the Council now had to decide, would they continue to fight against this force, or would they acknowledge humanity's place in the galaxy? Newm stood there, watching as Zorban seethed, and he realized that this was the moment the galaxy had been waiting for. The Council could either continue down its path of destruction or begin the long, painful journey of reconciliation. And whatever decision the Council made, Newm knew one thing for certain, the galaxy would never be the same again. The battle for Earth had been a defining moment, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The Galactic Council, with its vast power and centuries of unchallenged dominance, had been brought to its knees. Humanity, once dismissed as a primitive species, had risen to challenge the forces that sought to control them, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the sheer power of their will to survive. They had fought not only to defend their planet but to redefine their place in the universe. And as the dust settled, it became undeniable, a new era had begun. The Council's response to humanity's victory had been a reluctant acknowledgement. For the first time in millennia, the unquestioned authority of the Council had been challenged, and it had failed. The very foundation of their control had been shaken. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence of humanity's strength, some among the Council still clung to the outdated notion that they could simply crush the human spirit, that they could suppress this new force. But humanity's rise was not something that could be undone with force. It was a force of nature, unstoppable, undeniable, and now woven into the fabric of galactic politics. Admiral Reyes stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council, her posture resolute, her gaze unwavering. The humans had made it clear, they would no longer be treated as second-class citizens, no longer bound by the will of a distant, impersonal bureaucracy. Earth had been their home, their heart, and now it was their claim to the stars. As Reyes spoke, her words carried the weight of everything humanity had fought for. We have won this battle, she began, her voice calm but full of authority, not just with the weapons we wielded, but with the unity we forged. We fought not for power, not for territory, but for the right to exist on our own terms. And we will continue to fight, not with force, but with the strength of our ideals. There was a silence that followed, thick with tension. The Council's representatives shifted in their seats, some glancing at one another nervously. For so long, they had viewed humanity as little more than a footnote in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Now, they were facing the reality that this footnote had become a mighty force, one that would no longer be ignored. The power dynamic had shifted. And the Council, for the first time, had no choice but to listen. Zorban, the first speaker, stood, his many eyes narrowing in disdain, but there was something else in his expression now: respect. It was the first time in years that Zorban had been forced to confront the undeniable truth that he, too, was vulnerable. The Council was vulnerable. And humanity had proven it. "You think this changes everything, don't you?" Zorban's voice was colder than ever, but there was an undercurrent of something new, a recognition of humility. "You think you've earned the right to sit at the table of galactic leaders, as equals, as though your insubordination wasn't a direct challenge to our very existence." Reyes met his gaze, unflinching. "It wasn't insubordination, first speaker. It was a demand for respect. You have underestimated us, not just in strength, but in purpose. We are not your subordinates. We are your equals. And we will no longer bow to an order that is not our own." Zorban's lip curled, but his retort was interrupted by a voice from the back of the room. It was Newm, standing silently until now, but his words now carried a weight he had never before dared to voice in the presence of the Council. "It's not just about respect," Newm said quietly, his voice carrying across the room. "It's about the future. The old order is breaking, and the galaxy will have to evolve. The humans have shown us that resilience and determination are the true measures of strength, not the ability to crush opposition. You think you can still dictate terms from the top down, but humanity has proven that they will shape the future as they see fit. And I've come to believe that we should all have a hand in that future." There was a long pause. Newm, once the loyal diplomat of the Council, now found himself on the opposite side of the equation. He had watched as humanity fought, not just for survival but for the right to shape their own destiny. And in doing so, they had changed him, irrevocably. His loyalty to the Council was no longer a matter of political duty. It was a matter of personal conviction. Admiral Reyes nodded slowly, acknowledging Newm's words. "Humanity is not asking for dominance. We are asking for a place in the galaxy where we can live in peace, where we can grow and contribute, not as subjects, but as equals. We are not here to conquer or to destroy. We are here to build, to cooperate, to share knowledge." Zorban's eyes narrowed, but his posture had softened. He couldn't deny the humanity that radiated from the humans, their fire, their passion, their belief in their cause. It was something even the oldest civilizations in the galaxy had failed to understand. Humans were not to be ruled. They were to be respected. "We will need to reconsider the way we govern," Zorban admitted, his voice tinged with reluctant acknowledgement. "The galaxy cannot remain as it has been for the last 12 millennia. It cannot be a place where the strongest rule, where the meek are swept aside. Perhaps it is time we listen more closely, not just to your demands, but to your ideas." Rhea stood tall, her expression resolute but calm. "This isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about the galaxy moving forward, together. If the Council can accept that, then we can begin to rebuild. We have the potential to do something greater, something none of us could have imagined before. Together." And in that moment, something shifted. The Council's arrogance, their centuries of unquestioned dominance, had cracked open, allowing a sliver of something new to take root. A new understanding. A new vision. For the first time in galactic history, a Level 3 species had not only survived the tests of the galaxy's might, it had overcome it. The humans were no longer outsiders. They were pioneers. And as the dust settled, the Council, with its fragile unity, began to realize that the universe was no longer just theirs to control. It was shared now, with a species that had taught them something invaluable about strength and resilience. The new era was not one of dominance, but of collaboration. And humanity had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were ready to lead the way. The galaxy had seen countless battles, wars, and conflicts between advanced civilizations, but what humanity had shown was something entirely different. They had not won because of superior technology or overwhelming force. They had won because of something the Galactic Council had failed to understand, something far more powerful than advanced weaponry, the human spirit. The Council had underestimated humanity's resilience, but in doing so, they had underestimated the very essence of what it meant to be human. As the conflict began to settle, with the Council's forces retreating and humanity standing victorious, the true cost of the battle became clear. It wasn't just about the loss of ships or military strength. It was about the sacrifices made by the human people and the spirit they had shown, not just on the battlefield, but in every aspect of the war. For the humans, it had never been about winning for the sake of glory or power. It had always been about survival and protecting what they loved most, their home, their families, and their way of life. Admiral Javier Reyes stood in the war room, his face gaunt from days without rest. The battle was over, but the emotional toll of it all lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. His crew, the soldiers, the civilians, they had all given everything. And yet, the victory they had claimed felt bittersweet, as though the true cost of their sacrifice had yet to be fully realized. The humans had won, but it had come at a price that none of them could ever forget. "We did it," Reyes said softly, the weight of the words hanging in the air, but his voice lacked the triumphant ring he had expected. Instead, it was filled with a weary reflection. But at what cost? Around him, the members of his command team stood in silence. The faces of the soldiers, young and old alike, were filled with the exhaustion of those who had fought not just for victory, but for the right to exist. Their eyes spoke volumes, revealing the quiet realization that the battle had been about more than survival. It had been about the indomitable will of humanity to stand tall against the seemingly insurmountable forces that sought to destroy them. Lieutenant Maya Ruiz, her uniform stained with dirt and blood, broke the silence. "We didn't just survive, Admiral. We showed them who we are. We showed them that we will fight for our home, no matter the cost." Her voice cracked slightly, but there was a fire in her eyes, one that had never been extinguished, not even when the odds seemed impossible. Reyes nodded, looking out the window at the vast expanse of space. "It's not just about the fight. It's about what we stand for," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We fought for something bigger than ourselves. We fought for each other, for our children, for our future. We didn't do it because we had the best weapons, or because we could outsmart the Council. We did it because we had something they could never take away from us, our spirit." The truth of Reyes's words began to settle in, not just for him, but for the entire crew. They had all been part of something larger than any one of them, something that transcended the simple mechanics of war. They had fought with a resilience that had been tested to its limits, but each time they were knocked down, they had gotten back up. Not because they were afraid to lose, but because they could not afford to surrender. Their humanity was their greatest weapon. Their refusal to give in, to let the Council decide their fate for them, had fueled their victory. Back on Earth, as the battle lines had blurred, something else had emerged, something that the Council had never taken into account, the humans' ability to adapt. Time and again, when the Council thought they had been pushed to the brink, humanity had found a way to turn the tide. They had evolved, not just in terms of technology, but in how they thought, how they acted, how they responded to the most desperate of situations. It was a trait that had allowed them to overcome every challenge that had been thrown their way. Newm, now an ally of humanity, reflected on the transformation he had witnessed. Standing before a group of human civilians who had banded together to defend their cities, he was struck by the unity and determination that radiated from them. These were not soldiers, not trained warriors. These were everyday people, teachers, doctors, engineers, farmers, who had picked up weapons and fought because they knew that the fight was for their very existence. "There's something in them," Newm said, almost to himself, watching the humans organize and prepare for the next phase. "Something that goes beyond technology, beyond weaponry. They fight because they have to. Because they can't afford to lose." His voice was filled with admiration, and perhaps, for the first time, he felt a sense of reverence for the species he had once seen as inferior. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. It was Ambassador Lorax, the Vendorian representative who had long been sympathetic to humanity's cause. "They've shown us, haven't they? The power of the human spirit. I've been around this galaxy for centuries, and I've never seen a species with such unyielding resolve." Newm nodded, feeling the weight of the ambassador's words. "It's more than just willpower. It's a deep love for what they've built, for what they stand for. Their connection to Earth, there's nothing like it in the galaxy. No other species fights like this." Lorax's 6 eyes gleamed as he observed the humans around them, their faces etched with exhaustion but also unshakable resolve. "And that is what makes them so dangerous. Not their weapons. Not their technology. It's their ability to keep going. To never stop fighting, no matter how many times they fall." Back in the war room, Reyes's voice rang out once more, stronger now, filled with the conviction that had driven humanity to this point. "We didn't just fight to survive. We fought because we matter. Because our existence, our way of life, is worth protecting." The room fell silent. The humans in the room understood. They had fought for something that went beyond survival. They had fought for humanity itself, its values, its future, and its place in the stars. They had shown the galaxy that resilience wasn't just about physical strength, it was about the heart, the soul, the unwavering belief that no matter how great the challenge, humanity would rise. Admiral Reyes looked at his team, his voice steady but filled with a fierce pride. "The galaxy will know who we are now. And no matter what comes next, we will carry the spirit with us. We are not just survivors. We are the future." And in that moment, as the humans stood together, strong, defiant, and united, it became clear, the galaxy had just witnessed the rise of something far more powerful than any fleet or weapon. They had witnessed the rise of the human spirit. The dust of battle had settled, but the reverberations of humanity's victory echoed through the very heart of the galaxy. The Galactic Council, once unchallenged in its centuries of dominance, now faced an undeniable reality. The humans had proven that the old ways of rule, built on superiority and control, were no longer sufficient. For the first time in millennia, the Council was forced to confront the fragility of its power, and the possibility that true strength lay not in sheer force or technological might, but in the resilience and unity of a species that refused to be subjugated. As the leaders of the council convened, there was a tension in the air, palpable and thick. The once unassailable arrogance that had defined the council's approach to lesser species had now been punctured by the remarkable defiance shown by humanity. Zorban, the first speaker, sat at the head of the table, his 4 eyes staring into the holographic projection in front of him. The flickering images of the council's fleet retreating, humanity's victory flashing across the screen, were a bitter reminder that the old hierarchy was no longer valid. For all their technological supremacy, they had failed to predict the outcome. How did this happen? Zorban's voice was thick with frustration, his hands trembling as they hovered over the table. We had the best technology, the best strategy, and yet we were outmaneuvered by them. Behind him, the representatives of the Council, species that had once stood as beacons of galactic dominance, shifted uneasily. No one had expected the humans to not only resist but to push the Council to the very edge of defeat. And yet, here they were, a species the Council had regarded as an obstacle to be easily eliminated, now standing taller than any of them. They fought like cornered beasts, said Vexpar, one of the Council's most influential voices. But this was not a simple defense. They had a purpose, a drive we failed to understand. We thought them weak because of their lack of advanced technology. But they showed us that resilience, not force, is the true measure of strength. Zorban's anger simmered beneath the surface, but Vexpar's words struck a chord. The humans had done what no other species had been able to do, they had stood united. Against all odds, they had pushed back, not because of superior weapons or tactics, but because they were driven by something far more powerful, a deep connection to their home, to Earth, and a determination to protect it no matter the cost. As the discussions progressed, it became clear that the Council's view of power was irrevocably changed. The hierarchy that had existed for so long, where might made right and the most technologically advanced species ruled supreme, was being shattered. The humans, through sheer will and unity, had redefined the meaning of strength. We must rethink our approach, Newm, who had once been a loyal servant of the Council, now offered his perspective. His voice was measured, but there was a new sense of authority in it. Power cannot just be measured by technological advancements or military superiority. What we witnessed in this conflict was not just a clash of fleets. It was a battle of spirits, and humanity's spirit is stronger than we gave them credit for. The room fell silent as Zorban looked toward Newm, his expression a mix of disdain and begrudging acknowledgement. Newm, once a trusted agent of the Council, had spoken with a clarity that none of them could deny. It was clear now, humanity's resilience, their will to fight, and their unity were the true sources of their strength. We can't just dismiss them anymore, Newm continued, his words firm but thoughtful. What they've shown us is something we've long forgotten. True strength doesn't lie in subjugation, or in the ability to crush resistance. It lies in the ability to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds, to fight for something worth preserving. Zorban's lip curled in frustration, but he couldn't argue. The Council had always placed its faith in the hard logic of superior technology. They had never once considered that strength might lie in the hearts of those who refused to submit. Humanity had proven them wrong, and now, the Council was forced to confront a new reality. The galaxy could not be ruled with an iron fist, but must be led with understanding and respect. We have always assumed that we are the guardians of the galaxy's order, Zorban admitted, his voice low and almost reluctant. We've maintained peace by dominating the weaker species. But now, we see that our way is not the only way. Newm's eyes softened. And we must acknowledge that other paths exist. Humanity's rise is a reminder that the future of the galaxy cannot be governed by might alone. It must be guided by compassion, by an understanding that every species has its own story, its own right to exist on its terms. Zorban looked at Newm, the weight of the words sinking in. For all his pride and arrogance, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something that had long been buried beneath the Council's self-righteousness. Guilt. He had underestimated humanity, and now the very survival of the Council depended on how it responded to this new threat, this new force that had emerged. As the council members exchanged looks, a realization settled in. Humanity had done what the council had failed to do for centuries. It had unified its people, not through coercion, but through a shared purpose and a common identity. And in doing so, they had challenged the very foundation of galactic politics. It was no longer enough to simply control. Now, the galaxy had to be governed through understanding, through the recognition that every species, no matter how small, had something to offer. Zorban sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the decision that now lay ahead. The Council could no longer afford to see humanity as a mere inconvenience or an inferior species to be used. They had to see humanity for what they had proven to be, partners, equals in the shaping of the galaxy's future. Perhaps, Zorban said quietly, it is time to re-evaluate the Council's role in the galaxy. We are no longer just rulers. We must become leaders, leaders who guide through wisdom and respect, not fear. The room fell silent as the gravity of the words sank in. The galaxy was changing, and the Council was no longer the uncontested force it once was. For the first time in its history, the Council's transformation was not born out of military conquest, but out of the recognition that true strength came from within, from the unity of a people who refused to be silenced. And as Zorban, Newm, and the rest of the Council members sat in quiet contemplation, the future of the galaxy seemed uncertain. But one thing was clear, a new understanding of strength had emerged. And humanity had shown the way. The transformation of the Galactic Council was nothing short of seismic. After centuries of unquestioned authority, the Council was now grappling with a new reality, one where humanity, once regarded as a lesser species, had forced them to rethink everything they stood for. The battle for Earth had not only tested humanity's resolve but had reshaped the very foundation of galactic governance. Now, as the dust settled and the Council attempted to reconcile their failure with the emerging power of humanity, an unexpected shift began to take place, a shift that would define the future of the galaxy. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by a delicate balance of power. The Council had maintained control, not through compassion, but through coercion and fear. Species were either subjugated or aligned, their futures dictated by the Council's will. But humanity had shown them that real strength lay not in the might of armies, but in the unity of a people willing to stand up for their beliefs, their planet, and their future. And it was this lesson that the Council could no longer ignore. I never thought I'd see the day, Zorban, the first speaker, said, his voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. He stood at the head of the table in the Council's grand chamber, his four eyes focused on the holographic projections of humanity's victory. A level 3 species, defeating us. And yet, here we are. The room was filled with the murmurs of his fellow Council members, species that had once believed themselves the undisputed leaders of the galaxy. Now, they were faced with a reality they had never anticipated. Humanity had not only resisted, they had triumphed. Newm, standing off to the side, watched as the once immovable figures of the Council now appeared shaken. His decision to side with humanity had once felt like an act of rebellion, but now it seemed less like betrayal and more like the right choice. He had seen humanity's potential long before the Council had, and now, in the wake of their victory, he found himself feeling an unfamiliar sense of hope. We have two choices, Vexpar, the voice of reason for the Council, said, his voice cool and calculated. We can continue down the path of resistance, refusing to acknowledge humanity's rise. Or, we can change. We can recognize that the old way of ruling, of subjugating species, has come to an end. And we can find a way to move forward together. There was a long pause. Zorban's eyes narrowed, not out of anger, but in contemplation. For the first time, he realized that the old ways of the council, the ways that had been etched in stone for millennia, were no longer sustainable. The galaxy was changing, and with it, the council would have to evolve. "We've always governed through strength," Zorban finally said, his voice softer than usual. "But strength alone isn't enough anymore. We've learned that the hard way." He turned toward Newm, whose eyes were filled with a quiet resolve. "What do you think? You've seen it firsthand. What should our next step be?" Newm stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "The galaxy cannot be ruled by power alone anymore. Humanity has shown us that. They've proven that the true strength lies not in domination, but in cooperation. The old council, built on fear, built on control, has lost its relevance. We have lost our way. But it's not too late. We can change. We can form a new alliance, one built on mutual respect, on unity. A new era." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of Newm's words hanging in the air. He was right. The council had reached a crossroads. They could either continue to cling to outdated ideals, or they could embrace this new reality and begin to work with humanity. It was a difficult pill to swallow for many, but deep down, they all knew it was the only way forward. Zorban looked around the table, meeting the eyes of his fellow council members. Slowly, he nodded. Perhaps Newm is right. Perhaps it's time for a new approach. One that doesn't depend on fear. One that's rooted in partnership, in shared purpose. It was a profound moment. The once rigid, authoritarian council was beginning to see the wisdom in Newm's words. The arrogance that had defined their leadership for so long was giving way to humility, the realization that the galaxy's future could not be dictated by a single, powerful few, but should be shaped by cooperation and understanding between all species, including humanity. "We'll need to start somewhere," Vexpar said, looking over at Zorban. "Perhaps we should extend a hand to humanity. Extend a genuine offer of partnership." Zorban sighed, his voice quieter this time. "A partnership? After all this? They may never trust us again." "They don't need to trust us," Newm replied, his voice unwavering. "But they need to see that we're willing to change, to evolve. Trust takes time, but we can start with actions, not words. And the first step is acknowledging that humanity's place in the galaxy is not only earned but essential." It was a hard truth to swallow for many on the council, but they couldn't deny the reality before them. Humanity had fought for its place, and now, the council was in the position of having to accept them as equals. The old systems of domination, of ruling through force and fear, were no longer viable. If the galaxy was to have any hope of moving forward, it had to be together, in unity. Zorban's expression softened as he finally spoke, the words heavy with the realization that change was inevitable. "Very well. We will begin discussions with humanity. But I must warn you all, this will not be easy. Their pride is as strong as their resolve. This alliance will take time to build, and we will need to prove ourselves worthy." Newm nodded. "We will, first speaker. But the foundation has been laid. Humanity has already shown us the way. The rest is up to us." With those words, the room fell into a contemplative silence. The Galactic Council, for the first time in history, was faced with the prospect of forging an unlikely alliance with humanity. It would be a slow and difficult process, there would be resistance, no doubt. But deep within the hearts of the council members, there was a flicker of hope, a hope that this new path, this new era, could lead to something greater. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had shown that the future was no longer one of division and conflict, but one of unity and cooperation. The path ahead would be uncertain, but the possibility of a new beginning was within reach. And for the first time in a long time, the stars didn't seem quite so distant.